Guys, in last video we discussed about the concept of pointers. Now in this video we are going to start a new topic, that is functions in C++ programming language. In this video we will be discussing about the concept of functions, then we will discuss about the concept of function parameters. So let's start this video. The topic for discussion for this video is functions. But before starting the functions directly, I will explain you the concept of programming paradigm. So here we are going to discuss about functions. But before starting the functions, let's discuss about the concept of programming paradigm. The meaning of the paradigm says that way to represent. But since we are talking about the programming paradigm, so the meaning of programming paradigm is to way to represent our code. So there can be the multiple way to represent our code. Until this video, we were simply processing the first method. We were using the first method, that is called as a procedural programming. It's the first way to represent our code, that is procedural programming. Procedural programming. In case of procedural programming, what we generally do, we basically write the code line by line, again and again. If in case I want the functionality of these four lines again in my program, in that particular case I need to again write these four lines. And if in case I want the functionality of this particular four lines 50 times inside my program, I need to write these four lines 50 times again and again. So this was the drawback of the procedural programming. That means you were not allowed to reuse the code. Reusability of the code was not there. So to get the solution of the reusability of the code, we come to the new way of representing our code. So the new way of representing our code is called as a functional programming. So this is the second way to represent our code, that is called as a functional programming. Functional programming. The functional programming says that in procedural programming you were simply writing the particular lines again and again, so you are not getting the reusability of the code. So in a functional programming, I am providing you the concept of reusability of code. That means let's consider I want the functionality of these four lines multiple times inside my program. So what I will do, I will create a function, and inside that function I will simply wrap these four lines. Wrap these four lines, and this thing is called as function declaration. Now if in case I want the functionality of these four lines multiple times, so I will simply call that function multiple times. Call the function. And when we are declaring the function, we have not discussed the syntax yet, but when we are declaring the function, we will provide a particular name to that particular function. So wherever we want the functionality written inside a particular function, we will simply call that function by its name. Call the function by its name. So in this way you can create a functions, and whenever, let's consider I want this functionality 100 times, so I can simply call that functions 100 times inside my program. So the functional programming was providing us the concept of reusability of the code. That's the reason instead of procedural programming, nowadays we are preferring the functional programming. Now let's understand the syntax to create the functions. So to create the functions, let's understand the syntax. Syntax to create functions. So first we will define the type of the function we want to define. First the type, then the name of the function name, and inside this we will be passing the parameters. Parameter 1, there can be the multiple parameters. If you want, you can also pass the single parameter as well. Parameter 2, and inside this you will create the curly braces, and inside this you will write the code for the functions. Code of functions. Code means whatever the functionality you want to reuse, you will write that inside this particular function. So in this way, you can create the function. Now let's move to the VS Code. Let's start writing the code. So on my VS Code, I'm creating a file functions.cpp. Now here I'm simply including the header file iostream and using. I need to restart my VS Code. I think a minute. Here I'm including header file testing using namespace standard and then the main function. Now before the main function, I want to declare a function, and this function is of void type. Void type means I don't want to return anything. So if I don't want to return anything from that function, I will create that function as a void type. What void type? The name of the function is my function, and inside this I am passing a parameter that is of the string type. The name of the parameter is first name, f name, and then I am using the curly braces to define the body. So this is the same syntax. First I define the type as void. The name of the function is my function. I pass the single parameter, that is the first name, that is of string type, and then I have used the curly braces. Now the function says the purpose of this function is to simply print the value, print the f name. Whatever the value I will be passing, it will simply print that value, f name, and then a line break. Now inside the main function, I will call this function. So the name of the function is, this is called as a function declaration. This line is called as declaration of function. Declaration of the function. Now this line is called as calling the functions. Calling the function. So while calling the function, I will simply use the name of the function, that is my function. Now I need to pass the value for this f name. So in this I am passing John. That is of a string type, John. Now let's execute this. Execute this. So when I'm executing, I'm getting the output as John. Now let's understand this program first. So what I have done, I have simply created a function. That function is of void type. That means I don't want to return anything. I want to provide a particular functionality, but I don't want to return anything. We will discuss about the return in further videos or in this video. But for now, you can simply say from this function, the name of the function is my function, which is taking a parameter. Now we have two things, parameter and argument. We have two things. Parameter means whenever we are declaring the function, at that time we are passing the parameters. So this f name is a parameter. This is a parameter. But if in case, basically when we are passing the value of that parameter, so at the time of declaration, that is called as parameter. But at the time of calling, so this is the calling. I am calling this particular function. So at the time of calling, I am passing the value of this parameter. So the value is called as argument. Argument. So if someone asks what is the difference between the parameter and the argument, you will simply say whenever we are declaring the function, at that time we are passing the parameters, and at the time of calling that function, we are simply passing the values of that parameter, and those values are called as the argument. So this is a simple definition. So this is the basic difference between the argument and the parameter. So I have declared a function over here. The name of the function is my function, and inside this, what I am doing, I am passing one parameter, that is f name. F name is the name of the parameter. Now I am passing the value of this f name while calling the function. While calling the function, I am passing the value of f name as John. So this John is passed at this place. This John is passed at this place. So f name is storing John. F name is storing John. Now the functionality of this particular function says that you simply need to print whatever the value you are getting inside the f name. So inside f name, the function is getting the John from this due to this argument. That's the reason it is simply printing John on my output screen. Now this function, I have simply called this function only single time. I can simply call this function multiple times with the different values, with the different argument values. So for on line number 10, I'm calling this function for the second time, but this time I'm passing a different value. I'm passing Jessa. I'm passing Jessa. Again, I'm calling this function. This time I am passing Michael. Let's save this and let's execute this. So every time it will print the different values. First it will print John, because in first time I pass the argument, I pass this value. So for first time when I'm calling this function, I pass the value of f name as John. But when I call this function for the second time, I pass the value as Jessa. But when I call this function for the third time, I pass the value as Michael. So that's the reason we are getting John, Jessa, and Michael due to this cout statement. So this was the basic syntax to create a function. Now we discussed about the difference between the arguments and the parameters. Now there is one more concept that is called as the default parameter. Now let's discuss about the default parameter. So the default parameter says we will directly do the practical part. So the default if let's create a default parameter over here. So I am saying f name is, let me comment this, let me comment all this, and again we are writing a whole program. So here from line number 14, we are starting a new program. Hashtag include iostream using namespace. Name is standard, and then int main. Now before this, I am declaring a function. I am declaring a function. The function is of void type. The name of the function is my function, and inside this I am passing a parameter. That parameter is of string type. The name of the parameter is country, and this country is storing a value India. Country is storing a value India. Now the purpose of this function is to simply return whatever it is getting inside the country variable. Now this is called as a default parameter. I will explain you. Now inside the main function, I am simply calling the my function for the first time. I am simply calling the my function for the first time without passing any value. So if I will execute this, I am getting India as the output. So the purpose of the default parameter is simply like so this is called as a default parameter. Default means if I am not passing any kind of value for this country variable, in that case India will be printed. But if in case I will pass any different value, or I will pass a different argument other than India, in that particular case that particular value will be printed. Let's understand this. Now first time when I call this function, I have not passed any value, but second time when I am calling this function, right, second time when I'm calling this function, I have passed the value as Norway. So in this, when it will execute the function for the second time, this time I will get the output as Norway. So first time I will get the India, second time I will get the output as Norway. The reason, already I told you that this is a default parameter. This is a default parameter, and default parameter says that if I am not getting any value from the argument, in that particular case, I will get the default value. So that's the reason it is printing the default value, that is India over here. But if in case I am passing any argument, in that particular case this default value, that is India, is replaced by the argument whatever we are providing. So this India will be replaced by Norway. So that's the reason we are calling this as a default parameter, because if we are not passing any value, in that case the default value will be executing. But if in case we are passing any kind of argument, in that particular case that default value will be replaced by the new value whatever we are providing. So this is the purpose of the default parameter. Now, next is to pass the multiple parameter. Till now, we have only discussed the example for passing a single parameter. Now, in next example, we are simply going to pass the multiple parameters. So here again, I'm simply writing the fresh code. I'm simply commenting all this line. Now we are going to discuss about passing the multiple parameters. Passing the multiple parameter. So here I'm writing the whole code, that is int main. We need to include the header file also because we have commented all the things. So hashtag include iostream, then using namespace, entered, and then int main, int main. But before this, I am simply creating a function. The function is of void type. That function is this time. This function is taking the multiple argument. Multiple argument means first one is the f name, that means the first name, then the another string, that is a last name, then the another string, that is then another integer, that is of age, that is age, then there is a character, is gender, and then we also need to store the string over here. Hashtag include string. We have passed the multiple character. First one is the f name, first name, then another string is storing the last name, then age, and then the gender. Now inside this, I simply want to print f name. I simply want to print all the values. F, f name, then I want a space, then I want last name, then I want a space, then I want age, I again want a space, and I want a gender, and then I want line break. I simply want to print this information. So while creating the function, while declaring the function, this is function declaration. Declaration, these things, that is f name, l name, age, gender, these are called as a parameter. So while creating a function, these are called as parameters. But while declaring, while calling that function, we call those as a argument. So now I am calling that function, that is my function. Now I am passing the value of f name. F name is John, that is a string, so I am passing a string value, that is John. For last name, I am passing Doe. Then for age, I am passing 23. I am passing 23, and then for gender, I am passing a character, that is male. Okay, so this is the information I am passing over here. First, I am passing the value as John. Uh, First, I am passing the value for first name as John. Then in teacher, here we need to pass the integer value because we have defined the age as int. So first name will be storing the John, the last name will be storing Doe, the age will be storing 23, and the character will be storing the male. So this f name is storing John, this last name is storing Doe, this age is storing integer, and this gender is storing male. Now if I will execute this, the function is simply printing all those values. So let's execute this program. Let's save this and let's execute this. So when I'm executing this program, I'm getting John Doe 23 and M. So in this way, you can pass the multiple parameters. And if you want, you can also make any of the parameter as a default. So a default parameter we already have discussed. So in this way, you can simply pass the multiple values inside a multiple parameters inside a function. Now we have till now we have not discussed how to return a value from a function. Till now we have created all the functions of the void type. Now we will be discussing how to return a value from a function. So let's comment this, and now we are going to discuss a new topic, that is returning a value. Returning a value from a function. From a function. So here I am creating a new program, hashtag include iostream, using namespace, standard int main, and then above this I am creating a function. That function is of the integer type. Basically when I don't want to return anything, I always create the function using void. That's the reason I was always creating the functions using void, because from those functions I was not returning any kind of value. But if I want to return any value, in that case I need to define the function of that type. That means if I want to return an integer value, I will define a function as of int type. If I want to return a character, I will be defining this function as of character type. If I want to return a string, I will define this function as of string type. So in this example, I want to return an integer value from this function. So I'm defining this function as of int type, and the name of the function is my function. My function. Inside this, I'm passing a value that is of also an integer type. And then what I want to return, I want to return 5 plus whatever the value the user is passing. So this is called as function declaration. Now in line number 50, I am simply calling that function my function, and inside this I am passing the value of this x. I am passing the value as 5. So now since this function is returning me a value, so for that we also need to store that inside a variable that is of int type, var1, which is storing the output from this function. Now I will simply printing the var1. So if I will execute this, I will get the output as 5 plus 5, that is 10. Let's execute this. So I'm getting the output as 10. Now let's understand this, how the things are working. So I told you that if I want to return an integer value from a function, in that case I need to define the type as int. In case I want to return any other value, like if I want to return a string from this function, I will define that as of string type. If I want to return a character from this function, I will define the type of function as character. Now let me first erase this. So here I was simply looking to return a integer value. That's the reason I defined the type of this function as int. So when I defined the type of this function as int, then I provided the name, and inside this I pass the parameter that is also of integer type, because I can simply add a integer into integer. I cannot add integer into string. I cannot add integer into a string. That's the reason I pass the value as integer. Then what I am returning, I am simply returning the 5. This is my default value, and I simply want to add the x, whatever the user is providing. I simply want to add that value, and I simply want to return that value. And in line number 50, I am simply calling that function, and here I have passed the value as 5. So 5 will be passed as the value of x. Now this function will do 5 plus the value of x is 5. So 5 plus 5 will become 10. So it will return me value 10. It will return the value 10. And now I am storing that value inside my var1 variable that is also of int type. And then when we are printing this var1, we are getting the output as 10. So this was a simple process. Now if I want, I can simply create I can call this function multiple times with the different values. So again, I am on line number 50, I am calling the var2, and this time I am calling this my function, and this time I am passing the value as 10. So if I will print the var2, I will get the output as 15, because I am passing 10 and it is adding 5. So 10 plus 5 will be the 15. So this time I am getting 15. Earlier I was getting 10. I need to provide a line break over here. Then it will print 10 and 15 in the different line. So in this way you can create the functions, and you can also return the value from that particular function. So in this video, we discussed about the concept of functions. We discussed what is the difference between the procedural programming and what is the difference between the procedural and the functional programming. Then we discussed the benefit of creating a function. That means functions provide us the concept of the code reusability. Then we discussed about the syntax, and after that we discussed the multiple programming concept related to functions, like how we can pass a default parameter, how we can pass a single parameter, how you will create a function with a void type, how you will how you will return a value from a function. So in this video we discuss the multiple concept of the functions,